One of the most effective tools for managing stress is also one of the most overlooked. When we're stressed out, when anxiety and fears begin to well up in us, they come in the form of intrusive and unwanted thoughts that are racing through our mind about some issue or whatever that's going on. And so what we want is to get rid of that thinking. We want to stop all that incessant thinking going on in our mind. But we also want to solve the problem that we seem to be facing. And so we sit down and we start thinking about how we're going to solve the problem. And basically we're just having the same thinking coming over and over, especially when it's based in some kind of overwhelm or fear. This is not the best time to be thinking through. There's probably a time when we want to think through something and come up with a solution. But when we're in complete overwhelm and these kind of racing thoughts and repetitive thoughts are coming and going over and over and over again, this is not the best time for that. And so the most effective technique for reducing our stress in that moment is simply to be still, to be quiet. And that's incredibly difficult, I know, when those thoughts are racing. And so how to manage that? How are we going to go about reducing this thinking? And since we really can't control the way that the thinking's coming up and the amount of thinking that's coming up, then we're going to have to let go of it. And I know that seems absolutely counterproductive to you, but it actually is very, very effective. Think about this. If you get still and quiet and begin to notice the thinking, just simply observe the thinking as it's coming up. Get in a position of watching the thinking, becoming the witness of the thinking, rather than getting involved in it. This is kind of like when you were in first grade and the teacher, and let's say the whole class is acting up or talking, and the teacher gets in front of the class and to try to engage these youngsters in a game by saying, okay, boys and girls, we're going to play a game. We're going to see who can go the longest without talking. And so everybody zips it up and they try to be quiet, but of course within a few minutes or so somebody snickers or somebody says something, the whole class laughs and the whole game is over. But this is the kind of game that we want to play with ourselves, is to get still and quiet and not talk with the thinking, to try to be quiet inside, to not speak back and get in a dialogue with the thinker. But to watch the thinker, to see how the thinker is processing things, see how things are coming up, see how that's affecting our system, our body, the whole thing here. One of the things that is a great way to start this, because for some people that's really, really difficult, even getting outside of their thinking. So one way to kind of distract and get to a place of this background is to focus your attention on your breathing. To get quiet and simply watch the breathing. Get all of your attention on how the body is breathing. The first thing you're going to notice when this happens is that it seems like that suddenly you're doing the breathing. But before this was happening, before you brought your attention to the breathing, breathing was going on. Breathing was happening quite naturally. But the moment you bring your attention to it, it seems like you're in control of it. So what we want to do is relinquish that breathing back again to the body, to the autonomic nervous system, which does that for us all along. And as we notice that breathing always goes on, and that we can allow the breathing to go on, that we can't hold our breath. We can't take our own life by holding our breath, because the body will pass out and the body will breathe. The body's going to take over. So think about it. If you can't hold your breath technically, because the moment you're holding your breath, you're losing your breath. So so letting go of the breath, releasing the breath, is actually the way that breathing occurs. So as we begin to practice just this aspect of the breathing, we can now shift that to the mind. And so we can notice how thinking is coming up within the mind. And as we notice this, we obviously begin to have this sense, in the same way as the breathing, that we are in control of the thinking. that we're the thinker. But we want to do the same practice we did with the breathing, and that is to let the thinking go, let the thinker think. This is a really strange kind of phenomenon, but just being still and quiet, this can come about through practice. It's just allowing the thinker to think and watching the thinker. Breathing is an important part of stress reduction. I mean, think about it. If you have somebody who's having a panic attack, what's the first thing you tell them to do? Take a deep breath. Yeah, there's something about that breathing that's very soothing and very relaxing. As a matter of fact, there's actually some studies done on the power of breathing in through your nose, in that somehow, I don't know the science, but somehow breathing through the nose affects the emotions and actually calms us. Just that very thing of just breathing in the nose and out the mouth has a calming effect, because breathing is kind of like primary. And so we get our attention on just the breathing, and then we can kind of shift this from observing the breathing as the body does this on its own, to observing the thinker as the thinker does thinking on its own. But the same phenomenon will occur with the breathing, that the moment we shift our attention to the thinking, we'll have this sense in which we're doing the thinking, that we are the thinker. But this isn't altogether true. The thinking, if you notice, the thinking's coming to you. You're not really in control of the thinking at all. It just keeps arising. That's the problem here, right? And so to try and take control of the thinking at all is just more thinking. Right? So we can't control thinking with thinking. We can't make the thinking go off. There's no button to shut this off and make it go away. But what we can do is let it run out. Let it go. And without dialoguing with it, without going back and forth with it. You might notice that as you just kind of hold back a little bit as the observer more than the participator, that the thinking will start to slow down quite naturally. It'll kind of spin out. Something will come up, obviously some fear thought will arise, because most likely what's occurring when we're in this high anxiety and lots of intrusive thoughts are coming is the sympathetic nervous system has gone into a kind of survival mode. And it's coming up with every negative thing it can come up with because it's looking for danger. And so you may get quiet for a moment, and then the mind will bring up some explosive, volatile kind of thing again, and then you'll have this oh no moment, and suddenly you'll realize that you're back in that dialogue again. Well, that's okay. Don't sweat it. Don't feel like, well, I'm not doing this right. No, that moment that you notice that just occurred is huge. Notice it and just go, oh, I see what's occurring here. And just step back into the breathing again. Maybe just take your attention back to the breathing, and then again back to the thinking, watching the thinking. As you see, as the observer of the contents of my mind, thoughts, emotions, sensations, all of this processing that's going on, I transcend, or I am more than the contents of my mind. And what I am is the background, the peace,